In the cold, dark water along rocky coastlines, lobsters live lives that look simple from the surface but are anything but. They are ancient animals, their lineage stretching back more than 100 million years. Survivors of mass extinctions that erased creatures far larger and more dramatic. Their bodies are built like living armor. Their blood is blue, carrying oxygen with copper instead of iron. Their nervous system is decentralized, spread through clusters of neurons rather than one dominant brain. For millions of years, this design worked. It kept them alive in a world of crushing pressure, freezing temperatures, and constant predation. But that same biology also sets the stage for one of the most misunderstood and brutal deaths in the animal world. A lobster never truly stops growing. Unlike mammals, its size is limited not by age but by survival. As long as it can eat, avoid predators, and successfully shed its shell, it keeps getting bigger. This process, molting, is both a rebirth and a near-death experience every single time. The hard exoskeleton that protects the lobster also traps it. To grow, it must crack itself open from the inside. Days before a molt, the lobster becomes restless. Hormones flood its system, weakening the shell from beneath. Calcium is pulled out of the exoskeleton and stored internally, leaving the armor brittle. The lobster stops eating. It hides. Its body swells with water, pressure building against the shell like air in an overinflated balloon. Then, usually at night, the shell splits behind the eyes. The lobster backs out of its own body, claw by claw, antenna by antenna, leaving behind a perfect hollow copy of itself. For a brief window, the lobster is soft, completely defenseless. Its claws are rubbery. Its new shell feels more like wet paper than armor. Even a small fish could tear it apart. This is why many lobsters die during molting, especially as they get older and larger. The bigger the lobster, the more energy the molt requires, and the higher the risk that something goes wrong. A claw might get stuck. The shell might not split properly. The lobster might simply exhaust itself and die halfway out of its own body. But when molting succeeds, the lobster absorbs the stored calcium back into its new shell. Over days, it hardens. Over weeks, it grows stronger. And with each successful molt, the lobster edges closer to a strange biological paradox, functional immortality. Lobsters do not age the way humans do. Their cells continue to divide thanks to high levels of an enzyme called telomerase, which repairs DNA and prevents the cellular damage that causes aging in most animals. A lobster does not die of old age. There is no built-in expiration date. Instead, death comes from outside forces: disease, injury, predation, or the simple failure of the molting process. In theory, a lobster could live forever. In reality, most never make it past a few decades. And then there is the human world. For centuries, lobsters were not a luxury. They were so abundant along the North American coast that they washed up in piles after storms. They were fed to prisoners, servants, and the poor. In some places, laws were passed limiting how often inmates could be served lobster, because it was considered cruel and unusual punishment. That perception changed once railroads and refrigeration made it possible to ship live lobsters inland. Suddenly, scarcity replaced abundance. Price followed perception, and the lobster became a symbol of wealth. But the way lobsters are killed barely changed at all. The most common method is boiling alive. The image is familiar: a pot of water, rolling and violent, a lobster dropped in headfirst, the lid slammed shut. Within seconds, the lobster thrashes. Its tail curls and uncurls. The claws scrape against metal. To many people, this movement is taken as proof of instantaneous death or dismissed as meaningless reflex. For a long time, scientists believed lobsters could not feel pain the way vertebrates do. Their nervous system was considered too simple. Their reactions were written off as automatic. That assumption is now deeply questionable. Lobsters have nociceptors, specialized nerve cells that detect harmful stimuli like extreme heat. When exposed to painful conditions, lobsters do not merely react. They change their behavior. They learn. Experiments have shown that lobsters avoid areas where they previously experienced electric shocks. They rub injured limbs. They respond differently when exposed to substances that act as anesthetics. These are not random reflexes. They are consistent with pain perception. When a lobster is placed into boiling water, the temperature shock is extreme. Seawater is usually cold, often below 10 degrees Celsius. Boiling water is 100 degrees Celsius. The difference is catastrophic. Heat transfers rapidly through the thin areas of the shell, especially around the joints, mouth, and eyes. The nervous system is not instantly destroyed. Instead, signals fire intensely as tissue damage spreads. Proteins begin to denature. Cells rupture. The lobster's blood chemistry collapses. Death does not occur in one clean moment. It unfolds over tens of seconds, possibly longer. During that time, the lobster's body is flooded with stress hormones. Muscles contract violently. The tail flipping motion that people recognize is a powerful escape reflex, the same one used to flee predators in the wild. It is not a sign of peace or instant unconsciousness. It is the body doing everything it can to survive. Some argue that because lobsters lack a centralized brain like ours, they cannot experience suffering in a meaningful way. But suffering does not require a human-like mind. Pain is an evolutionary tool, and lobsters possess the hardware for it. Their neurons may be distributed, but that does not make the experience disappear. It simply makes it alien to us. There are other methods. Some cooks drive a knife through the lobster's head, aiming for the nerve centers. If done perfectly, this can render the lobster insensible quickly. But perfectly is the key word. The lobster's nervous system is not located in one neat spot. Missed by a small margin, and the animal may remain conscious while being dismembered. Freezing is sometimes suggested as a humane alternative, but slow freezing can be worse. As ice crystals form inside cells while the animal remains alive for an extended period. What makes the lobster's death especially brutal is that it comes after a life defined by resilience. This is an animal that survives crushing pressures, regenerates lost limbs, and can live for decades without aging. Yet its end often comes in a kitchen, in minutes, through methods developed long before we understood anything about its biology. There is another layer of cruelty hidden in the process before death even occurs. Lobsters are often stored alive for days or weeks before cooking. They are stacked in tanks or crates, their claws bound shut with rubber bands. Dehydration sets in. Stress weakens their immune systems. Injuries from transport can become infected. Some lobsters die before ever reaching the pot, their bodies discarded as spoiled goods. Even the act of binding the claws is not trivial. Lobster claws are asymmetrical. One is a crusher, capable of exerting tremendous force, and the other is a cutter, sharp and precise. Binding them prevents injury to handlers, but it also prevents natural movement, increases stress, and can cause muscle atrophy over time. A lobster held this way for long periods is not simply waiting. It is deteriorating. In the wild, death is usually sudden. A cod strikes. A seal crushes. A larger lobster attacks during a vulnerable molt. It is violent, but it is brief. In captivity, death is delayed, controlled, and repeated millions of times in exactly the same way. The brutality is not just in the final seconds, but in the system that leads up to them. What makes this uncomfortable is not just the science, but the mirror it holds up to us. Lobsters are not cute. They do not scream in a way we recognize. Their eyes are black and unreadable. It is easy to distance ourselves, but the more we learn about their biology, the harder that distance becomes to justify. Inside the lobster's body, the final minutes are not quiet. They are chemical, electrical, and chaotic. As extreme heat floods the tissues, proteins begin to unravel from their carefully folded shapes. Enzymes that once kept cells alive turn destructive. Cell membranes lose integrity, leaking ions and collapsing the electrical gradients that neurons depend on. This breakdown does not happen all at once. Different tissues fail at different speeds. Nerve clusters near the surface are hit first. Deeper ganglia continue firing even as surrounding muscles stiffen. The lobster's circulatory system begins to fail almost immediately. Lobsters do not have blood vessels like mammals. Instead, they have an open circulatory system. Their blue blood, rich in hemocyanin, sloshes through open cavities, bathing organs directly. When heat denatures hemocyanin, oxygen transport collapses. Tissues begin suffocating even while surrounded by liquid. It is a double assault, burning and asphyxiation happening simultaneously. This is one reason death is not instantaneous. The nervous system does not shut off in a single switch-like event. Signals continue to fire erratically as neurons struggle to maintain function. Some scientists believe consciousness, if present, fades unevenly. Sensory input may persist even as motor control degrades. The animal may still register damage without being able to respond effectively. From the outside, movement slows. Inside, the system is still screaming. For decades, this possibility was ignored because it was inconvenient. Lobsters were food, not patients. Research funding flowed toward animals we empathized with, mammals, birds, creatures with faces we recognized. Invertebrates were categorized as simple, mechanical, disposable. That classification is now cracking. Studies on crustaceans have revealed something uncomfortable. When exposed to painful stimuli, lobsters show long-term changes in behavior. They do not simply react and forget. They avoid locations where harm occurred. They modify future choices based on past injury. These are hallmarks of more than reflex. They suggest an internal state that matters to the animal itself. Pain, in an evolutionary sense, is not about suffering for its own sake. It is information. It teaches an organism what to avoid. Lobsters live in environments where injury is common: sharp rocks, crushing predators, territorial fights. Pain would be a powerful survival advantage. It would explain why they protect injured limbs, why they regenerate slowly and cautiously, why they behave differently after trauma. The idea that such an animal would evolve without pain is increasingly hard to defend. This growing body of evidence has forced some governments to act. In recent years, several countries have legally recognized lobsters and other decapod crustaceans as sentient beings. This does not mean they are granted rights like humans, but it does mean their capacity to suffer must be considered. In some places, boiling lobsters alive is now restricted or banned unless they are rendered unconscious first. These changes did not come from emotion alone. They came from data. Rendering a lobster unconscious is not as simple as it sounds. Electrical stunning devices have been developed that pass a controlled current through the lobster's body, rapidly disrupting neural activity. When done correctly, the lobster loses responsiveness in less than a second. The nervous system shuts down before extreme tissue damage occurs. Compared to boiling, it is dramatically faster. Compared to traditional knife methods, it is more consistent, yet even these technologies are not perfect. The lobster's decentralized nervous system makes complete shutdown difficult to verify. There is no single brain signal to monitor. Researchers rely on behavioral indicators: lack of movement, absence of reflexes, delayed recovery. It is an improvement, not a guarantee. What complicates the issue further is that lobsters are not uniform. Species differ. Size matters. Age matters. A method that works quickly on a small lobster may take longer on a massive one. A lobster weakened by transport stress may respond differently than a healthy wild specimen. This variability makes standardization difficult and discomfort easy to overlook. There is also the question people rarely ask: why are we so comfortable with this animal's suffering? Part of the answer lies in distance. Lobsters live underwater, out of sight. Their expressions are alien. They do not vocalize in frequencies we interpret as cries, even though gases escaping their shells during cooking can produce sounds that humans mistake for screams. Those noises are not vocal cords. They are physics. The real signals, electrical and chemical, are invisible. Another reason is tradition. Humans have always eaten animals. Death is built into the act. The assumption becomes that efficiency is enough, that intent does not matter. But efficiency without understanding can still cause unnecessary harm. The history of lobster consumption is filled with practices that persisted simply because no one questioned them. Even the myth that lobsters are basically immortal contributes to emotional detachment. Immortality sounds abstract, mythical, distant. It distracts from the reality that every lobster dies, and that the way it dies is a direct consequence of human choice. Functional immortality does not mean invulnerability. It means prolonged exposure to risk. Ironically, the lobster's greatest biological gift may be what condemns it. Because it does not weaken with age the way mammals do, it can survive long enough to be captured, shipped, stored, and killed in massive numbers. A fragile animal might die before reaching the market. A resilient one endures, only to face a more controlled, systematic end. There is a darker irony still. The very molting process that allows lobsters to grow and regenerate may make their deaths more painful. During molting cycles, calcium levels fluctuate, nerve sensitivity changes, and stress hormones spike. A lobster caught shortly before or after a molt may experience stimuli differently than one in a stable state. In captivity, molting is disrupted by artificial light, temperature changes, and crowding. The animal is physiologically off balance. Even before cooking begins, then there is the human psychological buffer, language. We say harvesting instead of killing, preparing instead of dismembering, fresh instead of alive. These words create space between action and consequence. They make the process feel clean, controlled, inevitable. But biology does not care about euphemisms. None of this means that eating lobster is uniquely cruel compared to other forms of meat consumption. Many animals suffer in ways that are far less visible and far more prolonged. What makes the lobster different is how recently our understanding has shifted. The science is new enough that tradition has not yet adapted. We are caught in the uncomfortable middle ground between ignorance and responsibility. Some argue that drawing attention to lobster suffering is misplaced when larger ethical crises exist. But ethical awareness is not a finite resource. Recognizing suffering in one place does not diminish concern elsewhere. In fact, it often expands it. The lobster becomes a case study in how easily assumptions harden into norms, and how slow those norms are to change, even when evidence mounts against them. There is also a deeper question lurking beneath the surface. What does it mean to respect life that does not resemble us? Lobsters do not bond the way mammals do. They do not nurture offspring. They do not communicate in ways we understand. But they persist. They respond. They avoid harm. They strive in their own alien way to continue existing. Evolution does not grant that drive lightly. When a lobster dies in boiling water, it is not punished, judged, or aware of its role as food. It is simply overwhelmed. Systems built to survive cold, pressure, and time itself are suddenly exposed to an environment they were never meant to endure. The brutality lies in that mismatch. The growing scientific consensus does not demand that humans stop eating lobsters. It demands something more subtle and more challenging, that we stop pretending the process is painless, instantaneous, or morally neutral. That we acknowledge the cost, even if we choose to pay it. Understanding does not force a single conclusion. Some people respond by changing their diets. Others support improved handling and killing methods. Some simply carry the knowledge forward, letting it inform future choices. What matters is that the lobster is no longer invisible. In the end, the lobster's story is not just about a crustacean in a pot. It is about how intelligence can exist without familiarity, how suffering can exist without screams, and how progress often begins with the uncomfortable realization that something we accepted for centuries may have been wrong, and that is where this story pauses. Not with a solution neatly tied up, but with an awareness that cannot be undone. If you want, say the word, and we can continue further into how this debate may reshape food ethics in the future, how science is redefining sentience itself, or how the lobster became an unintended symbol of humanity's complicated relationship with the lives it consumes.